Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me today here at the conference. So my talk is a bit more on the micro individualistic level, but I do believe some of the concepts build on the previous talk. So hopefully you will find something interesting. When I talk about social cognitive emotional skills, these are the two that I have been studying. So empathy, we have heard a little bit about, but also theory of mind. So I do want to briefly introduce the difference between the two to help us understand some of the projects I'll be talking about. So normally in the field, when we talk about empathy, it refers to an emotional response that we have when we see another person suffering. So normally it refers to something negative. But theory of mind is more about whether we can put ourselves in the shoes of another person. And it's more emotionally neutral. And sometimes this can be more positive as well, whether we can share the happiness of another person, so on and so forth. And the reason I've been interested in these topics in general is because I do believe that they contribute to our overall well-being, physical and mental health. But of course, I do want to briefly explain the pathway. So normally in the field, we do not claim that so for example, empathy and theory of mind directly contributes to the mental health. But we know that they are strongly associated with the quality of our relationships in daily life. So for example, your relationship with a partner, your relationship with a work colleague, so on and so forth. That's why we believe that having these skills help us to have better mental health in general. And on the other hand, when there's issues with these skills, they do contribute some relationship problems, such as loneliness. And that in turn would cause problems such as poor physical health and poor mental health. So I'll start with empathy first. And before I started to work in the field, there's already a large literature talking about things that reduce our empathy for other people, including different types of biases. And in particular, racism has attracted a lot of attention in the field. So that's where I started to do some work. But then I realized that actually ageism is another important issue in the field, and that has not been studied a lot. And I'll talk about that a little bit as well. But in essence, different types of biases seem to reduce our empathy for other people. And that's why I've been looking at these things. So back then, I was taking more of a social neuroscience approach, as in I put people inside the MRI scanner, looked at how their brain responds to other people. And the reason, not just me, but a field of researchers were taking this approach was because we thought that even though there is a huge body of literature talking about racism and empathy, a lot of it is based on what we call subjective self-report questionnaires. And the issue is when you ask another person about race, people became very conscious. So sometimes the answers are not, we would say, not very honest. So we wanted some more implicit ways to measure our empathy towards the pain of another person who is a different race. So that's why we took the MRI approach. And just briefly, the paradigm I used was that inside the MRI scanner, the participant would have watched short video clips showing other people in pain. And the pain videos are like this. So they saw another person receiving a needle injection on the face. And the reason being, I know it sounds a little bit brutal, but the reason that the field has been taking this paradigm is because we know that pain is a very strong stimulus and it reliably elicits response in people. So that's why in the field, we normally use pain. And how we do this is instead of just asking whether you have empathy for the pain of the other person. Behaviorally, we ask the participant to rate how painful the touch looked from a scale from 1 to 4, meaning not painful at all to very painful. And what we're looking inside the MRI scanner is activation in these two regions. And there's a little bit of history with this region, but how people discovered this was they first studied firsthand pain. So they just recruited participants and they delivered actual pain to some participants. And there was activation in these two regions. And then they showed videos to the same set of participants of other people receiving pain. And there was overlap in activation in these two regions. And that's why actually the region has been called the mirror neuron system, because we believe that it's kind of like a mirror system in our brain where we reflect the experience of another person. And alternatively, it has been called the salience network. So I do want to mention that briefly in case people are in this field. This work has also been challenged a little bit about whether it reflects empathy per se, because these regions are also involved in things that we believe are salient or personally important to us as well. So when I go into the field, a lot of people have already replicated this, as now it's called a very classic study. So what they did was the other researchers recruited two groups of participants. The first group were Caucasian participants, second group were Chinese participants. And to both groups of participants, they were put inside the scanner and they were asked to observe the pain of Caucasian actors and also Chinese actors. And they were doing a very similar paradigm, so rated the painfulness of the actors, and also the MRI scanner tracked the neural activation of the participants in the key regions. So what they found was actually both sets of participants showed the in-group bias. So there was more neural empathy for the pain of the actor who was the same race as the participants. And it was the same for both the Caucasian participant and the Chinese participants. And since this study, a lot of groups across the world have replicated this finding. And so the field started to have a discussion about whether such so-called neural activation in our brain is more biological. I think it's kind of set. So that's where I got into the field, and I was wanting to challenge that type of conclusion because I was studying in Australia as you can say, ethnic minority in that setting because I'm a Chinese person. And based on my personal experience and some literature about the contact hypothesis, I was wanting to test and prove that life experiences can reduce empathy, can reduce racism in empathy for pain. So in particular, I was interested in these type of questions. I was wanting to know whether contact with the other race can improve our empathy for the other race. But more importantly, I wanted to know what exactly about the contact that can make a difference. Is it simply the quantity of the contact, as in you just contact anyone that would help you, or is it about the quality of the contact that could play a role? So what I did was I recruited Chinese students who are studying in Australia. And so for that reason, the stimulus involves Chinese and Caucasian faces receiving the painful versus non-painful touch on the face, whilst their participants' neural activity was tracked with the MRI scanner. And for this study, it was more of a convenient sampling. So all the participants were young adults. So there were students in that university that I was studying. And to examine the effect of quality of contact, we did something that's now called the contact questionnaire. So we tried to ask more objectively. We just asked to the participant to estimate the percentage of people who they came into contact who were Caucasian and who were Chinese versus other ethnic minority people. And when we ask that, we ask across different settings as a way to try to capture the quality of the contact. So we ask the percentage of contact with the Caucasian as neighbors, just in general in the neighborhood, and also at the university. And then we ask about classmates more specifically, as well as the percentage of their friends who are Caucasians. And that's the main indicator of quality of contact we were looking at. But we also asked about work colleagues because some participants had part-time jobs whilst studying overseas. So I will just briefly talk about the key results we found. This was actually more complicated than I presented, but I can share more about the results if you're interested in particular about the in-group versus out-group type of discussion. So in essence, we did find, as we expected, that the more contact the Chinese participant had with the Caucasian people, the more empathy they had with seeing Caucasian strangers in pain. And that's mostly shown with this linear relationship you see in figure B. In particular, interestingly, we found that actually not everyone showed neural empathy for Caucasian people. Some people who had very limited contact with Caucasians actually showed a suppression of empathic response when they saw Caucasian strangers in pain. And yeah, that was in the region that we expected that's claiming to be related to empathy. And in response to the second question about whether quality of the contact played a role, it was quite surprising to us that we did not find evidence of this type of hypothesis. We found that actually the most significant correlations came from the more incidental type of exposure. So contact in the neighborhood and also seeing people in their university campus. And actually the number of friends who they reported having as Caucasian people was not correlated with the neuroempathy for Caucasian people at all in this study. So we, based on that set of findings, we concluded that at least in that particular context, the quality of the contact was the key in increasing empathy for the other race. But of course, we could not conclude that the quality did not make a have an effect, because we still had two possible hypotheses to explain our results, and these are still ongoing debates in the literature. So the first hypothesis is that even if you see strangers incidentally, you build up a sense of familiarity with them. So that this sense of familiarity explains the increase in empathy. Alternatively, it's about a group identity type of hypothesis. So because these were students who were studying in that city in Australia, the longer they spent in that city, the more increase in identification they felt with that city. So it's also about that they became a little bit like Australians. So that could be another explanation for that set of results. But a issue that we had with that study is we did not measure attitude in any way. So we did not really know whether attitude played a role in that. So then we started to look at ageism. And one of the reasons being there's a high number of literature about racism and empathy. Even nowadays, if you just search, you get lots of papers. And actually that previous study presented about racism attracted a lot of citation. But at the same time, we realized that there was very limited literature looking at ageism and empathy. And that was important to us because we're working in the health, sort of allied health setting. We know that actually a lot of students do have issue with ageism. So we were wondering how do young people respond to the pain of older people? So we became interested in that topic. And we were also wanting to answer the similar type of questions about whether the quantity or the quality of the contact had a role in increasing young people's empathy for the pain of older people. And also in the study, we also examined the effect of attitude by using an attitude questionnaire. So just briefly about the method. So the task was very similar. It's just that we changed some of the faces to older people's faces in receiving the pain. And we added a scale of ageism. And one thing I should know about this study is we did not think people aged 50 and above are considered older, but we conducted some pilot data collection, and we noticed that if we just ask people to report contact with people age 60 and above, we had a very limited number of young Caucasian Australians saying they had that type of contact. So we could not do any analysis at all. So that's why we had to reduce the definition of older age to 50 and above. So I will just highlight the key results from that study. So this time, the interesting finding was that the quality of the contact had a significant role. And even though the quantity overall was significant, but the quality of the contact had opposite effects. So in particular, firstly, we found as hypothesized that friendship was beneficial. So the young people who were making friends with older people in their daily life also had more empathy for the pain of older people who they didn't know about, so the strangers who were older. But at the same time, we found a very surprising and unexpected effect, and that was the contact at the work setting. So we found that the participants who reported having a part-time job, and if they had colleagues who were aged 50 and above, they actually had a reduction in the empathy for older people in general. And these are not referring to their colleagues. So at the same time, very interestingly, we didn't find any significant correlation with the scale that we used for that particular study about ageism. But I can talk a bit more about that. So the key conclusion of that study was that we said conclusive cooperative type of contact was needed to reduce ageism, whereas it's not as obvious for the race study. So before I talk about the older people, so one thing we did kind of discuss internally with our collaborators is that maybe this scale of ageism is actually outdated. So maybe young people's perception of older people has already been changing since scholars have developed different scales to try to capture ageism. So that's our kind of explanation for why attitude didn't have a role in this study. So in the last few minutes, I do want to talk about some of the ongoing work I've been doing. Also, these are more focused on older people. And that's because we realized in this field, at least, there's very limited knowledge about older people's social, cognitive, emotional skills in general. There's a lot of literature in this field about children, even infants, young adults, but we do not know much about older people. And actually, at the same time, we do not know much about middle-aged people. That seems to be very neglected in our field. So that's why I have been very interested in these populations. And since the age study, sometimes I get asked by other peers about how about older people? Do they also show more empathy for younger people versus older people? So that's something we are doing an ongoing study of. We're actually comparing the social cognitive skills of young, middle-aged, and older people towards young, middle-aged, and older people. And we're still analyzing that data a little bit, but I will show you a little bit of the preliminary results in a minute. The context of our study, though, is previous studies all have concluded there is a decline in aging. And the conclusion is that as we age, our perspective-taking ability seems to reduce. And one limitation that we wanted to challenge is that it might be about the measurement that we have been using in the field rather than ability per se. So in terms of the measurements, there has been two issues. One is all of the measures that we are aware of are developed in Western countries. So, and we know, for example, in our studies, we're collecting data from Chinese older people. We believe that firstly, it's not culturally appropriate. Secondly, actually a lot of the tools are developed from the infant and children literature. Even though people are continually revising them, we feel like the scenarios are not very suitable. So if you ask older people to try to resonate, for example, a child who's getting bullied, it's not as fair as asking a younger person to imagine school bullying. So because of that, our ongoing work so far has been about tool development. So this is a tool that we are validating, and hopefully our papers will be coming out soon. So this is an example of a scenario that we show to the younger adults. So as you can see, our actors are all young people. So we try to match the age of the participants to the people who we portray in our stimulus. And we have recently filmed an older adult version. So in our test, we have older adults, and we also have middle-aged adults in the scenario as well. And we try to capture the complexity of adults as we age across lifespan. So we try to talk about issues with health, but also caregiving. And in terms of caregiving, we try to capture the so-called the sandwich generation as well. So that's something we are doing. And very briefly, I do want to mention a little bit of our preliminary results to support our challenge against this idea of a general cognitive decline with aging. So what we found was, one step back. So we recruited young and older participants for that pilot study, and we just showed them some of the scenarios we have recently filmed, and we asked them how familiar did they feel towards that scenario, and also level of understanding towards the story depicted in that scenario. And what we have found is that there is a age difference on the old scenarios. So the older adults reported higher familiarity and higher understanding compared to the younger participants, but there was no age difference on the young scenarios. So our hypothesis, and so far our explanation is that older people were young at once at themselves. So they could understand the young people's scenarios. So we are still doing work on this, but our kind of hypothesis is that we don't necessarily decline in our social cognitive skills just because we're aging. And we believe that the life experience is actually helpful. So at least based on this, this data set. So I want to acknowledge my collaborators and also my department, faculty for supporting my work. Thank you.